The rain on Kessel's Rest fell sideways, which tells you everything you need to know about the place. Even the weather couldn't be bothered to do things the normal way. It was a mining moon nobody wanted, orbiting a gas giant nobody visited, home to maybe 400 people who'd each made at least one terrible life decision to end up there. Mira Aldous had made several, but the worst one was still ahead of her, currently gaining on her at roughly 40 kilometers an hour on 6 chitinous legs. She sprinted through the skeleton of a crashed colony shuttle, the kind of wreck that had been picked so clean by scavengers it barely qualified as metal anymore, more like a very large, very sad wind chime. Blood soaked through her jacket where a plasma round had grazed her ribs 3 hours ago, and every breath felt like inhaling broken glass. Behind her, the Vraxel trackers clicked and chittered to each other in that smug, satisfied way predators do when they know the chase is basically over and they're just enjoying the last few minutes of exercise. They were called the Kindred, which was a nice bit of branding for a species that ran the largest slave trafficking network in 3-star systems. Mira had the manifests. Names, coordinates, shipment logs. 200,000 data points proving exactly how many sapient beings the Kindred had bought and sold like crates of fruit. All of it sat on a drive currently duct-taped to her sternum, which in retrospect was not the most secure filing system, but she'd been in a hurry. She burst out of the wreck's cargo bay and nearly ran face first into a doorway that turned out to be attached to an actual building. A bar. Of course it was a bar. Every dying colonial outpost in the galaxy has exactly one, and it always looks like it lost a fight with a demolition crew. She shoved through the door and collapsed against the nearest table, which happened to be occupied by a man who looked like he'd been carved out of driftwood and then left out in the rain for a decade. He had a drink in one hand, a prosthetic arm that whined faintly when it moved, and the specific, weary expression of someone who had seen every kind of trouble the galaxy had to offer and found all of it slightly beneath him. His name, for the record, was Cale Draven, and he was going to have a very bad night. The bar went silent the way bars do when someone bleeding walks in, which is to say everyone suddenly became extremely interested in the bottom of their glass. Nobody looked up. Nobody offered help. This is a survival instinct honed over generations, and frankly, fair enough. Please, Mira gasped, gripping the table edge. I just need 5 minutes. Cale did not look up from his drink. You've got about 30 seconds before 3 very large insects come through that door and turn this bar into a crime scene. I'd love to help, but I'm retired. From what? Caring. He took a sip. It's a whole thing. Long story. That was when the Kindred trackers arrived, and Cale got his first look at the brand on Myra's wrist as she raised her arm to shield her face. A circular scar, seared there deliberately. He'd seen that brand before. On people who hadn't lived long enough to become memories he could joke about. Something in his chest did a slow, unpleasant twist, like a rusted hinge being forced open after years of disuse. Ah, hell, he muttered, and stood up. Let the record show that Cale Draven's retirement lasted approximately 4 minutes and 11 seconds, which by his own admission was a personal best. Most of his retirements didn't survive the first drink. The lead tracker, a broad-shouldered specimen with mandibles like pruning shears, stepped into the bar and surveyed the room with the casual menace of someone who has never once lost a fight and has stopped being surprised by that fact. His name, translated roughly, meant something like, "He who collects," which honestly undersold how unpleasant he was in person. Cale would come to know him as Threx, mostly because, "He who collects," was a mouthful to shout during a sword fight. The human female, Threx said, his voice a wet clicking rasp through a translator box. Step aside, soft one. This does not concern you. Funny, Cale said, drawing a long blade from a sheath on his back that had clearly seen better decades. Because it's currently standing directly between me and my drink, which makes it extremely my concern. The sword hadn't been sharpened since roughly the collapse of his marriage, which by his own rough calculation was about 6 years, 2 campaigns, and 1 truly regrettable haircut ago. It still worked, mostly out of spite. Threx lunged first, which was his first mistake, because Kale had spent 4 years in the Void Marines learning that the biggest guy in the room always leads with his biggest weapon, and the biggest weapon is easiest to see coming. Kale sidestepped, brought the blade around, and opened a line across Threx's forearm plating. Not deep. Just enough to make a point. You will die for that, Threx hissed. Everybody keeps promising me that, Kale said. And yet, here I remain. The other 2 trackers moved to flank him, and this is where things got complicated, because Kale's prosthetic arm chose that exact moment to have what could generously be called an existential crisis, seizing up mid-parry with a sound like a dying kettle. He compensated by turning the seizure into a shoulder check that sent one tracker into a table, which was either brilliant improvisation or blind luck, and honestly, at this point in his life, Kale had stopped trying to tell the difference. The fight lasted 90 seconds and felt like 9 years. When it ended, 2 trackers were on the floor groaning, and Threx had retreated through the door, snarling something about reinforcements that the translator box rendered as a series of very rude words. Kale sheathed his sword, sat back down, and finished his drink in one go. "You're bleeding on my floor," said the bartender, who Kale was pretty sure had not actually said a single word in the 4 years Kale had been drinking there. "She's bleeding on your floor," Kale corrected, pointing at Mira. "I'm just standing near it heroically." Mira slid down the wall until she was sitting, clutching her side. "Thank you," she managed. "Don't thank me yet." That was round 1. Guys like that don't come alone, and they definitely don't come back friendly. He knelt down, tore a strip from his own shirt with the smooth, practiced motion of a man who had done a great deal of first aid in his life, most of it on strangers he'd later have to bury. "What's your name?" "Mira." "Mira. Great. Wonderful. Very normal name for someone who's apparently important enough for the kindred to burn fuel chasing across a moon nobody's heard of." He pressed the cloth against her wound. "What did you do, steal their lunch?" "Their entire supply chain," she said, wincing. "Names. Routes. Every colonist they've ever bought or sold in the last decade. It's all on a drive. If I get it to a coalition relay, it goes public. Every kindred shipping license in the sector gets revoked in a week." Kale went quiet for a moment, and the sarcasm that had been holding his face together like duct tape slipped, just slightly. "That brand on your wrist. Where'd you get it?" "They marked me when I was a kid. Before I got out." Her jaw tightened. "I got lucky. Most don't." He nodded slowly. Years ago, a lifetime ago it felt like, his squad had been sent to extract a group of trafficked colonists from a kindred processing station. They'd gotten in fine. Getting out was the part that went wrong. He'd lost 6 friends that day, and the guilt had followed him from bar to bar ever since, patient as a debt collector. "Well," he said, standing up and offering her a hand. "Guess I'm buying you those 5 minutes after all. Might take a little longer than 5, though. Fair warning." Outside, the rain kept falling sideways, and somewhere above the clouds, a kindred war cruiser had just dropped out of high orbit, releasing a swarm of tracking drones that lit up the wreckage field like 100 angry fireflies. Threx stood at the tree lean, transmitting coordinates, his voice a low satisfied hum. "Even genocide has a paperwork process," Kale muttered, watching the drones descend through the bar's cracked window. "Somewhere out there is a kindred middle manager filling out a form that says quantity, 1, status, troublesome." "They're not going to stop," Mira said. "Not until I'm dead or the drive is destroyed. Good thing I don't plan on either of those things happening." Kale turned to the room, which was still full of patrons very intently studying their drinks. "All right. Anyone here ever fired a mining laser at something that wasn't rock?" A long silence. "Anyone here fired a mining laser at all?" A shorter, more encouraging silence. 3 hands went up, one belonging to the bartender, who apparently had a personality after all, buried under several years of professional disinterest. Fantastic. We're going to barricade the wreck. It's got good sightlines and it's already full of jagged metal, which honestly just saves us decorating. Kale looked at the drone swarm through the window and sighed the sigh of a man who genuinely believed his fighting days were over. Humanity's greatest strength has never been strategy. It's spite and improvisation, usually simultaneously. Let's go be strong. What followed was less a battle and more a masterclass in creative problem-solving under extreme duress. The bar's regulars, a rotating cast of miners, mechanics, and one suspiciously well-armed grandmother, dragged furniture and scrap into the shuttle wreck's cargo bay, rigged mining lasers to portable generators, and turned empty fuel canisters into remarkably effective improvised explosives. Kale directed traffic with the weary authority of a man who had done this exact thing too many times before, cracking jokes the entire way because if he stopped, he was fairly sure he'd have time to be scared, and scared wasn't useful right now. The drones came first, easily dealt with by the mining lasers, which turned out to be excellent at frying small flying robots when properly motivated by fear of enslavement. Then came the ground trackers, a full squad this time, moving through the rain with the coordinated precision of a species that had never once been embarrassed in combat. That changed tonight. The defenders held the line with a chaotic, improvised ferocity that seemed to genuinely baffle the kindred, who kept pausing mid-advance as though trying to locate the tactical manual page that covered colony of angry miners with lasers and spite. Kale fought at the center of it, sword in one hand, malfunctioning arm doing its best impression of a functioning arm in the other, cracking wise the entire time because apparently that was just a permanent setting for him now. You know, he shouted at a tracker mid-parry, for a species that runs an entire trafficking empire, your business continuity planning is genuinely terrible. The tracker did not appreciate the review. Threx himself appeared at the edge of the firelight as the drones thinned and the ground assault stalled, and he looked, for the first time, less than smug. He raised a weapon toward the shuttle where Mira and two others were working to get an old comms relay online. Kale stepped into the line of fire without hesitation, which surprised absolutely everyone, including Kale. You again, Threx rasped. Me again. I know, I'm disappointed too. I really thought we'd covered this. They fought in the rain, blade against claw, and it was not pretty, and it was not fast, and by the halfway mark Kale was fairly sure at least 2 ribs had joined his prosthetic arm in the not currently functional club. But he'd learned a long time ago that winning fights wasn't about being the strongest thing in the room. It was about being the thing that refused, on principle, to stop getting back up. Threx was strong. Threx was fast. Threx had clearly never had to work a double shift for rent money, bury 6 friends, and then show up to work again the next day anyway. Kale had. Kale had made an entire career out of it. The killing blow, when it came, wasn't clever. It wasn't even particularly well executed. Kale simply outlasted him, ducked one exhausted swing too many, and put 6 inches of dull, tired steel through a gap in Threx's plating that probably shouldn't have been there. Threx went down. He did not get back up. Somewhere behind Kale, the comms relay crackled to life with a triumphant, static-choked burst, and Myra's voice rang out, transmitting 200,000 data points into the wide, waiting galaxy. By the time the sun came up, gray and reluctant over Kessel's rest, the remaining trackers had retreated, the war cruiser had broken orbit rather than face a coalition patrol responding to an emergency beacon nobody official was supposed to have access to, and the bar was, against all odds, still standing, -1 door and most of its dignity. Kale sat back down at his usual table, which had somehow survived the entire battle without a scratch, a fact he chose to interpret as a personal insult. You're a mess, Mira said, sitting across from him, a fresh bandage on her ribs and a much lighter look in her eyes. I've been called worse. Mostly by myself. He waved down the bartender. Drink? You've earned it. Also I've earned it. Everyone in this bar has earned about 6 drinks, frankly. The data's out. It's already spreading across 4 networks. The Kindred shipping licenses are getting flagged as we speak. Good. He raised his glass. To spite, improvisation, and a truly excellent lack of strategic planning. Mira clinked her glass against his, and the narrator, watching all of this unfold with the weary fondness of someone who'd seen this story 100 times in 100 different bars, decided that was as good a place as any to close the book. The rain kept falling sideways outside, the way it always would on a moon nobody wanted, but for one night, at least, it fell on people who'd earned the right to sit still and let it.